All right, welcome back, gang. So in this week, we're going to be talking about interpersonal and group communication. Interpersonal, primarily, we're going to be talking about listening skills. And then group communication is how do you interact in group environments. Both of these are really good topics for business, since we spend a lot of time working on both of these. Let's begin. And this slide gives you your key terms. So this relates to what will potentially show up on an assessment, a quiz. And again, you'll also see in the week 3 resource module the study guide for the quizzes. So that should be your main document that you reference to make sure you understand those terms before you take the quiz. And that'll also correlate a lot with what you see here on the key terms out of chapter 2. So when we talk about nonverbal communication, this is what we commonly call body language, right? So it's basically everything else besides the words coming out of our mouth that we are picking up on as a listener to the person we're speaking with. So what's interesting about our nonverbals is that they convey a lot of meaning, and they're doing it without our consent. So, and the reason that we as listeners place more emphasis on nonverbals is because we actually learn to communicate first when we were babies and we're connecting with our mother or father or family through nonverbals. We would make eye contact and use simple body language like I'm hungry to start communicating through nonverbal gestures. So nonverbal gestures can be very rich. And if you want to test this, go to a country where you don't speak the language. And what will you fall back on? You'll fall back on nonverbals and pointing and trying to indicate through your hands and nonverbals what it is that you're trying to communicate. So as listeners, when we're watching someone speak, we're going to pay a lot of attention to their nonverbals. The content coming out of their mouth might be fine, but their nonverbals might be giving us a different set of information, such as they're nervous, or they're bored, or they're not interested in me. So we have to be very careful about our nonverbals when we're communicating, particularly in a business setting. You know, a simple example of this would be maybe you're going out with your significant other and they ask you, do you like this outfit I'm wearing? And without giving them much eye contact, you look, but you kind of cover your mouth and say something like, oh yeah, that's a pretty shirt you're wearing there. Because of my nonverbal of covering my mouth and perhaps looking away with eye contact, they're going to believe that I think that it's not a nice shirt. Even though I'm saying it's a nice shirt, my nonverbals are providing a contradictory message. So this comes up primarily when we're presenting, because when we're presenting, people are judging our whole communication experience, not just the words that we're speaking, but also our body language. So we really want to try to minimize our nonverbals that would distract from our presentation. And we're going to talk about that in this lecture. So one of the terms in chapter 2 is this concept of meta communication. And meta communication can really trip us up, particularly in business when we're sending written messages, and particularly when it's short written messages like email or text, both of which tend to be pretty blunt and direct, and we're really just looking at words on a screen. So if I sent a message, maybe somebody submitted, here's my top line report of our committee's accomplishments this year. And my response back was, this report is better. They're going to wonder, now, do you mean that my previous work was bad? Or am I trying to say good solid revisions on the previous draft that you'd sent me on that work? So we really have to be careful with written messages, and I'm sure we've all had the experience if you've ever had a disagreement with somebody via text messages or an argument with somebody via text messages. I'm sure for most of you, when you had your disagreement over text messages, that it was resolved rationally and compassionately and without a lot of back and forth. No, it probably just blew up, that text message, and it ended badly. Why? You're using the wrong tool. You're using the wrong channel to communicate. Text is a very blunt tool. It's just short messages on a phone, right? So it doesn't have much what we call media richness. Media richness is how much other information is being conveyed through that communication channel. The most media-rich channel is face-to-face. There's eye contact, there's vocal variety. We can soften it up when we want to be compassionate, and we can make it very firm when we want to be more assertive. There's touch. If you want to be compassionate with somebody, you have to be careful about that in the workplace. But we have so many more tools available when we're communicating face-to-face than when we do with some of these other channels. So one of the things that you're going to hear from me repeatedly in this business communication course is, when possible, particularly if it's important communication, strive for face-to-face interaction. You'll have a better communication experience. I remember when I was a new regional marketing manager for Petco, and I was establishing these regional marketing territories and hiring regional marketing coordinators across the US, traveling quite a bit. And I was at my desk late night one evening catching up on email, and an email came into my inbox. Somebody else was obviously working late, and it was the senior vice president of operations sending an email to me and copying my boss with a proposal to change the reporting structure of the regional offices and taking all the newly hired marketing coordinators that I'd interviewed and hired and trained and have them report to the regional vice presidents in each region and not to me. And naturally, I was not in favor of that idea. All of a sudden, my direct reports, the people who report to me, go from 8 to 0. What does that mean for me as a new regional marketing manager? If I don't have any of those reports, is my job going to change or even be eliminated? So that would give me a lot of concern, and it did. My natural reaction was to reply to that email. And I'm going to reply to that email by writing a quickly crafted and hopefully not too aggressive or upset email responding why this new proposal was a bad idea, right? And I did. I wrote that message, but I didn't send it. Right before I hit send, I realized he's still here in the office right now. It's about 7 o'clock at night. I'm still here. I think I should just go up and talk to him directly and see how that communication goes. And so I went up and knocked on his door and kind of caught him off guard because he didn't realize I was working that late, and I think he was trying to avoid having to talk to me about this new proposal. And I mentioned, I got your email about this proposal. Can we talk? And we had a productive conversation. Email and text is very similar to you driving in your car and somebody cuts you off on the freeway, and you might exchange some hand gestures back and forth, right? But you're insulated by your glass and steel cocoon from that other person. Email and text, which are arm's length communication, are also protected through this arm's length interaction. Now, if somebody cut you off on the freeway and you guys had gestures back and forth with each other, and only to find out that you're both pulling up in the MiraCosta parking lot and both getting out to go to class, one of you is a student and the other one's me, and you're in my class, well, now we're going to have a different discussion, right? Now we aren't protected by that cocoon. Not that we're going to be aggressive, but it's going to realize, uh-oh, I probably need to communicate in a different way. So this is one of the problems of technology, is that we have, with email and text, we're arm's length, and it's easier to kind of just push something out and send a quick emoticon or something. It's very blunt by the nature of the message. And so a meta communication mistake would be something that is the receiver reads more into the message than was intended. And this can happen a lot, again, with email or text, because we're doing these things really fast. Please get me your report by Friday. It's fairly blunt and direct and doesn't, have any media richness with other cues that you get with face-to-face. So if you have something that requires some collaboration, that's something that is going to potentially require some negotiation, or it's something that's conflict in nature, or you're discussing other employees, email's a lousy choice. And we want to remember that when we send an email, we've pushed that email out, and that football is now out of our hands, and somebody can take that message that we crafted and send it to whoever they want. So watch out for meta communication, and vague messages can be interpreted in different ways. So this is one of the things we want to watch out in our communication patterns. Safest way, go face-to-face. Which brings us to listening skills. So important that we listen clearly, that we seek to understand the other person first before we seek to have them understand us. So this is important in relationships and certainly also in business. So here's a quick way of checking yourself to see how solid of a listener you are. Have you ever had the situation where you meet somebody new, you're introduced to that person, and you walk away, and within a few seconds you've already forgotten that person's name, right? So you might have actually chatted with them for a while and had some conversations about something you both have in common. And you walk away from that and you've forgotten that person's name. And to make it worse, you tell yourself, I'm horrible with people's names. I'm just not good with people's names. And you perpetuate that cycle. That's not good for business. You want to be able to remember people's names because you're developing relationships. Part of the problem is that people speak about 100 to 150 words per minute, but mentally we process at about 500 words per minute. So we have some extra bandwidth here. Somebody's talking to us, and our minds have some extra RAM that are looking for other things to fill the void. And we all know what that's like, that as soon as we have a down moment, we pick up our phones and we start processing with that. Even this lecture, with me talking to you right now, you might be distracted with other things. You might be checking text messages and coordinating some plans for the weekend while you're watching my lecture. That's okay, it's online. I don't take any offense. But listening as a communication skill in business can have a lot of ramifications. If you're sitting down with your boss and they're tasking you on some project, a project that you begged to work on because it's going to lead to a promotion, and you didn't get it all down and understand what was supposed to be done, and you have to come back to your boss several times and ask her what you're supposed to do, that's not going to bode well. So we have to know how to listen well. Certainly, it's a way to receive information, to solve problems, and to share feelings with personal and relational communications, and it's common with social interactions. But we're all very distracted, and our social media use has made it harder for us to focus and really sit and listen to somebody with great intent. So let's talk about some of the listening blocks that we have. So these are some common bad listening habits. I think we've all had these habits ourselves. Faking attention, when really we're thinking about something else, or we're really just listening and waiting for that person to stop so that we can say what we've been rehearsing in our mind to replay back. We're really not actively listening. Allowing disruptions, cell phones pervading our lives all the time. Stereotyping the person who is speaking to us. Oh, they're an instructor. They're going to be boring. Or me as an instructor. You're a student. You're going to be uninteresting, right? So dismissing subjects as uninteresting. And failing to observe nonverbal aids, meaning somebody is giving you some nonverbal cues, like looking around, like I want to exit this conversation, and not picking up on those nonverbal aids. That would be if I'm giving you guys a lecture in a classroom. I can't tell how many of you are falling asleep right now because it's online. But if I was giving a lecture in a classroom and I notice a lot of students were nodding off or looking disinterested, that I would need to speed it up, change my energy, or even walk over to the areas of the room where perhaps people are losing focus. Got to pay attention to those nonverbal cues. So how do we do a better job at listening? Well, it really starts with when we're sitting down with somebody, even if there's a disagreement or a potential argument, is you have to switch your intent of your communication from wanting to be right to wanting to understand the other person. It doesn't matter what the other person's opinion is. They might think that the world is flat, and you might think that the world is round. Science would probably be in your favor that the world is round. And yet there are people today that believe that the world is flat. So the goal of listening to that person isn't to explain why they're wrong, it's to understand them. So you want to understand them first. And there's something about a person being understood first. Once they feel like they've been heard and they're understood, they're going to be more receptive to hearing your point of view. So particularly in conflict, you want to avoid getting attached to this right or wrong position, and really just try to understand the other person's position first. One way that you can improve your listening is through confirmation of understanding, basically checking for understanding. And that's something along the lines of, so what you're asking me to do is, so am I hearing you right that what you want is, things along those nature. So what you're saying is that you need me to change up this PowerPoint in these areas because, so check for understanding to make sure that you heard the other person right. And if you're not sure, then bring it up. Oftentimes we don't raise our hand or ask because we don't want to appear stupid, but the old ancient Asian saying is, the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So it's okay to ask and make sure that you understand first. Practice it in the classroom. Ask questions of your instructor. Check for understanding. It's your education. You're paying for it. Get your knowledge. All right, so that's a lot about interpersonal communication with a focus on listening. The other part of this chapter, chapter 2, is talking more about groups. I covered teams lightly on the first week lecture, but now we're going to dive into groups a little bit deeper. Again, in this class, because you're online, you're not going to be working in groups, but you will in other courses, certainly your upper division work, and certainly when you're out in the workforce. So it's important to understand how to collaborate and work in a group environment positively. This slide talks about some of the negative and positive group roles. One way to eliminate negative group roles is to assign roles. Assign roles that you see on the positive column here so that everybody has a role. And that will help eliminate some of these negative roles. Another tool that you can use in formal business meetings, we typically work off an agenda. An agenda is an outline that lists here's where we're meeting, who's attending, and it lists in numerical order, here's the topics that we need to discuss, and oftentimes the agenda also includes time allotments for each of those agenda items. If you find that your meeting, your group gathering is going off track because of some negative roles, somebody's trying to digress or dominate, then an agenda can be a wonderful tool to help you stay on track. I'd love to hear that opinion further, but because we have 8 things on the agenda, how about we table that, put it to the side, in other words, in the interest of time to get through our agenda. So the agenda can be a way to manage somebody who's a negative group role. It's not about them, it's about the agenda is requiring that we move forward. Okay, again, so in this class you're not working in teams, but in business you will. And these are some of the common types of groups and teams that you will work on in the business environment. We have task force, quality assurance, cross-functional team, and product development. And I've worked on several of these. So a task force is typically for something that has to be completed in a limited amount of time, like plan the holiday Christmas party would be a task force. Whereas a product development team would be, those are the teams that I used to manage at Jack in the Box, focusing on the development of a new product from idea to system launch. And some of these terms are can be interchangeable. For example, at Jack in the Box, our product development teams were also cross-functional. And that means that we had people from different departments in the company, purchasing, operations, training, marketing, information systems. They would all be together, and me as the product manager leading the team, we would all come together to take that product idea through the research steps to commercialization and eventual rollout into our 2,500 restaurants. So, and it's cross-functional because those folks represent different departments, different functions of the company coming together. So quality assurance teams, the second one down, those are typically what we call a self-managed team. They tend to be a permanent team structure, and they're a self-managed team that is long-standing. So you have to kind of ask yourself, what type of teams do I like to sit on? Do I like being with people long-term or more of a short-term, i.e. task force setup? In later lectures, later down further in the course, we'll talk about different organizational structures like matrix organizations and some other nuances of different teams within a business. So the Johari window, this actually applies when you're working in teams. There's things that you know about yourself and some things that you may not know about yourself, and that all kind of gets revealed when you're in a team environment or even in business where you happen to interact with other people on a regular basis. So the Johari window talks about this in greater detail. There's, if you think back to the matrix like we had the Covey matrix earlier, from top to bottom we have things that are known to others, meaning we know about this quality about you, and then down below that we have not known to others, that this is something that only you know about. And then going vertically, we have known to self, things that you do know about yourself. And then on the far right column, we have things that are not known to yourself. So things that are known to you and known to self might be that I'm funny, right? So you know it and other people know it by interacting with you. You have a good sense of humor. Things that are known to others but not known to yourself would be perhaps you say a lot or like a lot. I remember taking a speech class in college many years ago, and these were recorded, and when I watched the recording I saw that I touched my nose constantly, and I wasn't even aware that I was, I'm like, what is wrong with me? I can't seem to stop touching my nose. So that was something that I had a blind spot about. So we all have blind spots. They can be not just behavioral, how we speak with others, but it can be character blind spots, things that we don't see about ourselves. And when you're in a group environment, that stuff can be revealed. Item 3 is hidden areas. So that's our secret behaviors that other people don't know about. So when we're home alone and no one else is around, we might be a somebody who sells fitness lifestyles with an online website, but at home alone when no one's looking, we binge eat Reese's dark chocolate peanut butter cups and have a whole stash of them in our freezer, right? So a hidden area. And then the not known to self and not known to others is that unknown area. And that's really like, you don't know this about yourself until the situation reveals itself. How do you handle yourself in an emergency or in a crisis? And you might find out this piece about yourself that you didn't know. So that's the Johari window. And you see these light bulbs up top on certain slides. If I haven't mentioned that before, I think I have. But those are clues that that's a slide that will probably have a assessment, a quiz question on that topic. All right, so our last slide out of chapter 2, going back to listening skills one more time, and the 4 different types of listening. Casual, listening for information, intensive listening, and empathetic listening. Casual listening is when you're at home kicking back and you're just listening to music. So it's just kind of washing over you. The TV's on in the background. That's just casual listening. Whereas listening for information is when you are taking notes, classroom listening, instructor talking and you're listening to what they're saying. Don't forget there's an exam coming up next week and here's the topics you need to know. In business, when you're sitting down with your boss and she's giving you work to do, that would be listening for information. Intensive listening is oftentimes when you're having a disagreement or an argument. So now we know that we should also be first seeking to understand, right, that person before we seek to be understood, but we're listening intently to what they have to say. And then the 4th, and this is one that's a little bit underutilized in business, is empathetic listening. And this is more in the realm of counselors, where they're listening to how you feel about something. And this can actually have a lot of value in a business setting. If you're sitting down and perhaps your manager and an employee is having an issue with a task that you're giving that person or a new initiative that you're rolling out for the department, and they're having some issues with it. And as you're listening, you're realizing that maybe they have other things in their personal life that are going on that are causing them to be resistant to this new initiative. So empathetic listening can have value. In the workplace, in business, we tend to underemphasize empathetic listening, and we don't have time to be counselors full time, and that's not the intent here. It's more about listening to how somebody feels about a task again, or something that they're being given to work on, and kind of understand what's behind it. And if you can understand that, then once people feel heard, usually the resistance goes away. All right, so those are your 4 different listening skills. You see a light bulb up there to make sure you understand those 4 terms. That's it out of chapter 2. You do have another lecture this week. I'm putting 2 on this week so we can get a little bit ahead of schedule. Thank you for listening. The end. Bye-bye.